We're going to go into our next presenter, who is one of our international presenters, and that is Professor Maria Attad. Professor Attad comes to us from Malta. I remember when we spoke, there were a number of areas that she could have spoken on, and she so graciously agreed to speak in the area of ITS. She's Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Geography and Director of the Institute for Climate Change and Sustainable Development at the University of Malta. And so I'm going to go right into Professor Attad. So share her screen and to unmute her mic, and we'll hear her presentation. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you, Trevor. So I'm very pleased to be with you, even though, of course, here it's very late. So the topic of my presentation, which I discussed with Trevor and the organizers of the conference, looks at the role of ITS in future mobility. And what I thought of including in the presentation was first a broad understanding of what are ITS in general, but then focusing on some of the research which we have been doing here in Malta and implementation of systems that would help in understanding what the role of ITS is. Islands, of course, are a very special place for case studies. They are sort of self-contained entities, so we have looked at ways in which we have implemented our systems, for example, and found some challenges, but also some opportunities. There is probably less awareness of the fact that islands face many problems that are faced by larger, more developed countries. But of course, we have less time, less experience, less resources, including money, human capital, and space. And of course, in transport developments, islands can vary considerably. When you consider the variety in terms of population, size, GDP, and of course, their growth in number of vehicles owned. So we see here some islands going from Haiti to Jamaica to Mauritius. I added Trinidad and Tobago, of course, and then Cyprus, Malta, and the Mediterranean, and then Singapore. And you see that the variety is quite broad. Some smaller islands having very high car ownership. If you look at the car ownership in Malta, for example, it's one of the highest compared to Papua New Guinea. So we have all sorts of varieties in terms of transport developments, but also impacts. And of course, the challenges are the same. So I went into the Daily Express, and of course what has come up is TNT's traffic nightmare. Here in Europe, we talk about road safety, so we've seen some of the data with regards to that. And this is a study over here which we did on the right, which we did in Malta in 2015, which look at the external costs. We costed the impacts of air pollution, accidents, climate change, noise, and congestion as a yearly contribution. And also looked at the regional distribution of congestion as well. So the challenges across are quite the same, as you can see. Now, if we look at the capacity of the transport system that is needed to support the growing mobility needs, has been pushed to the limits in most cities. And Harvard Miller in 2013 contended that the need to identify new capabilities rather than capacities of the transport infrastructure is required in order to increase efficiency and capacity without the need for extending the existing infrastructure. I mean, having said so, Malta is extending its infrastructure now since the last 5 years has been investing quite heavily in extending the infrastructure. So, you know, we might have thought of extending or identifying new capabilities, but then there's a big gap between what we think and what we actually do. And in September 2015, McKinsey and Company published an article titled Urban Mobility at a Tipping Point, in which they claimed that new business models and technologies are emerging to solve the mobility challenge faced by cities, in that they will help us at least resolve some of the issues. So what are intelligent transport systems? Intelligent transport systems are a wide array of information and communication technologies developed for people, goods, vehicles, and infrastructure with the aim of primarily improve the safety, the vehicle, and the infrastructure efficiency. The ultimate goal, of course, being reduction in congestion, which of course many cities in urban areas suffer from, and pollution, which is, at least in Europe, a primary concern because the implications that that has on the health bill of many of our European member states. So if you take the European Commission's definition here, ITS are vital to increase safety and tackle Europe's growing emission and congestion problems. They can make transport safer, more efficient, and more sustainable by applying various information and communication technologies to all modes of passenger and freight transport. Moreover, the integration of existing technologies can create new services. And this is where, of course, ITS has been a key driver to support new growths in jobs in the transport sector, almost in some extent linking also to the green economy and the green jobs that are at least mentioned as part of the transport sector in the transition phase. So here are some examples. I highlighted some of them in blue because these are the examples which I will be showing you in terms of the projects which we have done here locally. But you can see that the area is quite broad, from traffic management to toll and excess systems, to public information, enforcement, and mass, something which is already mentioned. And while some of them, of course, have a longer history, if you think of traffic management and intersection control, highway and traffic monitoring, ramp metering. These are all systems which have been developed over a very long number of years now in control engineering. But some of them now have become even more efficient. The technology is improving, and there is a sort of more pervasive use of these systems because of other technologies that have continued to develop. So if we look at the improvements in communication technology, of course, the fact that now we have systems that can talk to each other over Wi-Fi systems means that you don't need to have wired networks along systems. And so the use of public information, it's easier now to give people information simply because smartphone use is more pervasive, and so on. So it is a very, very broad web of applications and technologies altogether that bring a broad understanding of ITS applications within the transport sector. So if we looked at types of technologies used in ITS, we have some of them are the more sort of traditional, the ones that I remember as a student to already look at, the loops and the magnetic sensors. Now, of course, today we have the Internet of Things, the IoT parking sensors, which is, of course, an upgrade to the traditional sensors. So physical, static, sending embedded sensors embedded in the road infrastructures. Okay, so we have sensors which can see where the cars are going, how many cars are passing, and so on. Then we have mobile devices that are placed on individuals or vehicles. And these are the systems we find tracking public transport vehicles. Here on the photos on the right, we see the BRT that was part of the extension plan for Rio a few years ago when they were hosting the World Cup. And they didn't invest in trains, they invested in BRT. And you can see how today we can follow systems and buses remotely through mobile devices. And of course, the combination of both infrastructures which are static, okay, so sensors, whether they're radar or acoustic or vision, that are fixed, but also these moving sensors that are caught and recorded through mobile technology. Now I'll pass on to some of the examples, in actual fact, which I've been involved in my career. If we look at Valletta, we wanted to look at a system that actually controlled the number of vehicles that drive into the city. Valletta is a walled city, so if you look at the picture on the right, you see that the city is actually built around fortifications. I mean, the fortifications are very clear here at the edge of the suburb, but also at the main entrance of the city. And the city in itself is a UNESCO World Heritage Site with a daily population of 50,000 and then a resident population of just 7,000. And the area is less than a kilometer squared. So you can imagine the density of all the activity that goes on. The fact that they are built on a peninsula makes it a challenge, but certainly for us in terms of the technology, it was a blessing, because that means there were less entry points into the system. And anyway, we wanted to ensure that we had a system that regulated to a certain extent the demand for cars entering the city. We looked at the parking, which, as you can see here on the picture, was also is also allowed on the pavement, which is not particularly very nice for whoever is going down the street, but also for people who live in buildings. And what we found was that the capacity of the city was at 3,000 parking spaces. But during the day, the city parked so many cars above the limit through illegal parking, very creative car park attendants, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to bring that down. We wanted to make sure that there was the number of cars were parking within the limits of the capacity of the city. And so we went through a process of, and there's quite a lot of literature on this. I went through a process of learning also from others. This happened right after the 2004 implementation of the congestion charging in London. So we also went to London to learn from them. We created, we designed a system that would work with camera technology as well, based on data communication infrastructure. So you see the camera and you see the transponders sending data. We used automatic number plate recognition technology. I'm not disclosing any privacy issues. That's my photo of my car. And we looked at creating billing and payment gateways, enforcement and exemptions in the system. And what we basically did was we created a system that was monitoring the whole city in and out. And through photographs taken of number plates, we were able to establish how long people went in and went out and how long they stayed inside, and then charged accordingly. Of course, there were exemptions, which was based on registration, emergency vehicles, police vehicles, public transport vehicles, electric vehicles also, because this is 2007, so we wanted to try to promote electric vehicles. Residents were exempted, and on average, the exempted vehicles rose to approximately 7% of the total fleet, which was high, at least in the start. But of course, no policy can be theoretically perfect, can it? It has to be also a bit political. So, in comparison, of course, these were the systems which we looked at: London, Durham, also in the UK, Edinburgh in Scotland, and Stockholm, that introduced it in 2006. And we compared the systems together. Here are some of the publications that basically describe the implementation of the technology, but we could also see some benefits. So when we look here at the total cars parked, that original graph that I showed you, by March 2008, that had already gone down to relatively good levels in terms of capacity. The number of contestations. So when the system started, of course, there were some contestations in the system, but the system learned very quickly, and the level of contestations, that is, people asking for refunds or contesting their bills, went down significantly over 2 years. Then we see the number of vehicles. We see the differences between the years prior to the system and the system as it was then implemented eventually. So you see a decline, the effectiveness really of the system overall. But I think to me, the biggest satisfaction was seeing the modal shift. Valletta was the only town in the whole of the island to register a 10% shift from car to bus in the period 1998-2010. And considering that the congestion charge came into effect in 2007, I think this can be attributed with some level of confidence to the implementation of congestion charging, which is fully controlled by an automatic system. Then once you have the data, of course, talking about smart cities and big data, you can do anything with it. This was an interesting project we had about an app which we wanted to develop using the data that was being generated by the cameras that were already existing in place, and basically looking at changes in traffic in real time. So in real time, you can go into the place, you can see the pattern of traffic in the previous week, but you can also see the pattern of traffic as it evolved over the day. You can actually plan your travel. It will show whether there is a high level of traffic or no traffic, depending on the color, green, orange, and red. And so this information allowed us to provide information for people who wanted to visit the city by car, which at the time was innovative. And I think the biggest innovation, of course, was our access to the data, which is quite unique in terms of the not only of the density, but also of the real-time feature. More of technologies that help us detect information. This is using vision technology. This is one of our PhD students looking at perfecting vision technology to capture information about movements of people and vehicles. So here you see an automated system, in actual fact, capturing different features in the photo that are moving particularly. So you see a cyclist, a bus, a car. And we tested this using training data sets that allow us to read vehicles during the day, which is the easiest, but also during the night, which is not the easiest. So this is something which was quite innovative in terms of the technology. And vision technology, of course, can be combined with other things. So it is easy to have, just a webcam over some places and automatically detect the traffic and any incidents that can happen from that. This is something that was mentioned earlier, the parking management systems. We are currently implementing this in the city as a pilot. It's part of a European project called Destinations. I invite you to maybe have a look at it. It involves 6 island destinations and the implementation of sustainable modes of transport, starting from electric vehicles to electric public transport and including parking management. So we are indeed testing the parking sensors technology, but we're also testing vision and other means of parking management technologies, which then can be linked to, of course, mobile apps or phones, or the technology is unlimited at this point. I mean, think about SF Park in San Francisco, which were probably the most advanced at the time when they implemented their system there. Talking about mobile tracking, this was also something we developed because we did realize at a very early stage in our project that one of the things that we lack is information about mobility. So the behavior of people, how they moved, where they go, at what time they go, and for what purpose. And so earlier on in the research, we, for one of our projects, which was a demand responsive transport system, we wanted to ask people to tell us their trips, but not in a survey like the traditional household travel survey. We wanted to do it in real time. And so we created this app, which is Viac, which is trip in Maltese. And basically through the technologies available in a standard smartphone, you would get the smartphone to plot trips and then allow you to store those trips one by one. And then if you include the mode and the purpose and submit those trips, then we could use that information to look at patterns of movement. It was partly successful. I think one of the biggest issues with these kind of applications is, of course, engagement and retention of users. So yes, I agree that applications today are endless, but for some reason, I still think there is an issue of engagement and user retention, which is, I think, important in terms of sustainability and long-term implications of these technologies. So this is another screenshot which shows sort of how you would choose the purpose and the mode, and then you submit and confirm. So we measured trips, and we found that the technology could give us 82.8% true positives, which was really nice because, of course, we're using GPS technology and we're using mobile phone technology, which sometimes is not that accurate. If you go through areas where there isn't coverage, you know, there are all sorts of issues. But on the whole, we were very happy. This was another project, the shared demand responsive transport system, which we developed at the university. We developed the server software. We simulated the demand for it, and then created the onboard information system and client application. So what we wanted to look at, and this was our pitch for the funding, was we didn't want to create a taxi system like Uber, but we didn't want to create a public transport service. What we wanted was something in between that was demand responsive, so not following a schedule, and would be able to carry more than one person or two or three. Typical, of course, of Uber Pool today and Via and other technologies which eventually, of course, were implemented. Just some system design overview, but you can see that it's relatively easy. You have the vehicles, you have 4G. So this was a project funded by Vodafone, which is a mobile company. And of course, we wanted to include the use of mobile technologies in this whole system. But as you can see, all the system talks by 4G infrastructures. And so the system here provides for the controller, the map, the interface with the vehicle, and of course, people booking their trips. This was the rudimental technology that we've created. This would be the screen that the driver would see that would take him from, this was the university site, all the way to the site where they needed to pick up the individual, and then so on and so forth, with the information about how many passengers and so on. And this would be the interface on the phone. So people would choose where they wanted to be picked up and send it off to the system. We were quite happy with the results. Again, for 88% of the customers, the trip increased was only by 50%, considering that by bus it is much higher. The average waiting time was 13 minutes. The average walking time was 4 minutes. And the average pickup, sort of the actual pickup error was 2.2 minutes. And so we were quite confident that a system designed at least for the university, because the focus on the case area was for university, for the university campus, would be particularly useful, because Malta has a very, very high car dependence, and the university is no less a reflection of the state. So we have a big problem with cars and parking. And then, of course, you have what is coming up, the cooperative, connected and automated mobility, again, linked primarily to safety. So this is the pitch that we see from most advocates of CAVs. We see the reduction in traffic accidents, the enhancing of quality of life, and of course, the impact that it can have in the long term, particularly on energy consumption, operating efficiency, and environmental sustainability and land use. These, together with ITS, so the way that the systems and the cars interact with the infrastructure on the street, can play a huge role. And of course, until 2020, AV trials have taken place across a number of cities in the world. We also have companies like Autora that has been the first to innovate in the space, aiming at testing AV-based sightseeing tours for tourism travel. So for island destinations, I think that is very, very significant. And of course, if you want more information, I would point you towards the European umbrella organization for ITS. This is Ertico Europe, and they look at all the various elements of connected and automated vehicles, clean mobility, transport and logistics, urban mobility, and the cross-sector approach to smart mobility. I hope that has provided a broad overview. I know I went a bit fast, but I'm also conscious of the time. In conclusion, the future of mobility and transportation systems truly lies in the technological advancements of ITS and CAVs. We really need to harness these technologies. I know somebody mentioned, for example, the fact that old fleets or second-hand fleets are also present in Trinidad and Tobago. We have the same situation. We have an increasing second-hand fleet and a relatively old fleet, at least when compared to Europe. And so we tend to miss on these advancements. So if we think of the emission standards and Euro emission standards, most countries have a higher share of Euro 6 emission standards, which includes also technical improvements in diesel. But we have an average fleet of 15, 16 years of age. So we miss out on all the recent advancements. We really need to think how we maximize the technological advancements that are coming out of technologies. Of course, the investments in such technologies reflect the goals and ambitions of these systems to improve safety and efficiency and provide real-time and effective travel information, because that is, we can look at all the studies, that is what really people really need and want. The disruptive nature has also the potential to impact the world of work and jobs in transportation. I think we need to, I am one of those people who's a bit skeptical about sort of the disruptive nature of cars, because cars have always been there. So whether they're disruptive, whether they're electric, I'm not sure. But there could be disruptive technologies. If we switch to shared vehicles, if we switch to autonomous vehicles that are electric and sourced from renewable energy sources, then there is really disruption. If we switch to electric and then we burn fuel or coal in the power stations, that's not really disruptive, is it? But in the world of work and jobs, there certainly is an opportunity. Of course, one word of caution lies in the disposition and speed of governments to adapt laws and regulations and communities to adopt such technologies and their benefits. And as we've seen, as I said, in the case of our aging fleet, the people are not ready to switch to newer vehicles, and governments continue to support the importation of second-hand vehicles, for example, and to a certain extent encourage it through fiscal means. So we need to make sure that the future of technology is actually followed up by governments and communities that are really ready to embrace these ideas and these benefits for the benefit of all in the future. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
And thank you so much, Maria. Thank you for that presentation, a walkthrough in terms of the ITS and all its connotations. We're going to move right into the question period. I know we're running late, and I want to thank you all for staying with us. If I may, I do have a number of questions for all the panelists, but I'm going to ask a question first of my colleague, Mark Raymond, because I know he's in a borrowed location. Mark, very quickly, important question from one of our participants. He asks, are we going to address very directly the gentrification caused by urban design that makes cultures disappear and the associated innovation that occurred in cities? Will we discuss the democratic process needed to devise sensible interventions? And of course, the fact that lands and rents increase after interventions, and that impacts the space accessibility for certain groups. Complex question, Mark. How do you respond?
Well, yes, let's address it. I'm not sure whether gentrification is caused by urban design. I would say that gentrification is caused by a range of motivations that are social, economic, driven by a whole number of factors. So, I think these are important questions. I'm not clear how that relates to what I was discussing, but I think what the issue here is being raised is the idea of gentrification, and I think that's another critical and important issue that is part of the broader matrix of understanding how different disciplinary activities need to be integrated effectively if we want to get effective results from our planning and our enterprise. So I would love to talk about those issues more in the sessions tomorrow, and I would be keen to engage with that, and also hear from the whoever's asking the question what their thoughts are on how those issues can be integrated into integrated planning and development ideas.
Thanks, Mark. I think we might explore some of that tomorrow. My next question goes to Mrs. Martinez. How can you promote and create sustainable transport cooperation between the West Indies, the islands of the Dutch Caribbean, and the Spanish-speaking islands? Do you really think that this kind of cooperation is possible? And which organization has to take the lead? Is it a UN or organizations such as CARICOM?
Right. So you would have heard in my presentation when I mentioned the ferry thing, when I had hoped and I was expecting that would have taken off, because obviously we're mostly islands surrounded by water and stuff, and nothing really happened. We've always had this problem in the Caribbean that we can't seem to work together on certain things. We are successful having a West Indies cricket team. I won't even comment on how successful that union is, but it's possible. And during Cricket World Cup, the transportation, air transportation and everything else seamlessly with the sunset legislation went away. It was amazing at how many people were able to move so seamlessly through to get to all the different islands and the different games. So that proves to me that it's possible if the will is there and if we are all willing to work together, and it has to be done by us. I don't think it doesn't need anybody from outside coming to tell us how to do it, because we can do it. What we have to do is to be committed to do it, and for our, shall we say, our leadership, our government leadership, to be willing to commit to doing it. And we're going to be forced to do it. It's unfortunate. I mentioned Prime Minister Gonzalez and his comment on how well the region responded, how quickly the region responded to their need in St. Vincent when the volcano exploded. And I made that same point. Why do we have to wait for a disaster in order to work together? You know, obviously, if we can do it during a disaster, we can do it during, shall we say, peace times. So yeah. let's just do it.
Correct. Let's just do it. Thanks a lot, Cheryl. This question for Lacey Williams. Lacey, how can we begin to address the safety of women and girls who are the primary users of the public transportation system? So that's part of road transport safety as well. How do we begin to address that?
Well, I think policy has to direct that. You know, we first of all must understand that they are vulnerable road users, and women on the whole, they play a significant role in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. If you look at you know, a lot of the service-oriented jobs, many different areas, they play a significant role, and they must be recognized for that. So I think from at the policy level, there must be the need to or the will to actually address the issue from a number of areas. I mean, for example, land use. One of the things that we see, you know, in the development of our suburban areas and so on, where, you know, we always refer to it as the last mile. It takes, you know, to get from Port of Spain to, for example, to some of the suburban areas, even along the east-west corridor, at times you have to take sometimes 2 and 3 different modes of transportation just to get there. So rationalizing our transportation systems, not just the trunk transportation systems, for example, but the commute from the main line to the actual household, you know, making sure that those are as efficient as possible and reliable, whether it be through private enterprise or through even the same public transport service corporation, providing that access to those points. I mean, that is a critical area, I think, as well as collaboration among the various stakeholders. Again, security is a major issue. Let's face it. I mean, even for whatever time of the day that you're commuting, if you want to get from, again, to some of the remote areas, Longdonville comes to mind. For example, if you take a bus to Shogunas, how do you get from Shogunas to Longdonville if you're a shift worker, right? So besides the need for an organized system grounded in policy, what are the security arrangements? How are the security services supporting the movement of people at odd hours during the night, for example? So I'd say, in short, a couple areas. There must be the stakeholder collaboration. It must be driven by policy. And again, I'm looking to see cooperation among the respective entities to see how they can actually make those things happen with specific focus. And as Cheryl was indicating just now, just having the will to make sure it happens.
Yeah, and if we tie that with a mobility as a service operator, as Cheryl was talking about, and we tie that with the ITS and apps where one can, in fact, through that MES operator linked to a provider of maybe a shared ride, as the case may be. That is one way of improving safety. But as we talked about, you have to have an institution that is overseeing that. And speaking about institutions that are overseeing that, let me ask this question for Selena. Is Jamaica currently proceeding with a potential PPP to reinstate their tourist train? What lessons or similarities can Trinidad and Tobago extract from this procurement approach?
At the moment, the train system is down. It's not working. The development of Jamaica is again attempting to get investors to revitalize the train services. So we're not in the process of any sort of contractual arrangement with anyone for this service. But if I were to recommend a model, I would recommend a build, operate, transfer model. We currently have the, but we need new rolling stock, we need new train stations, and all of this we cannot afford to do. So we definitely need private investors. And looking at a tourist train at the moment, I don't know if it's the best concept, because for a tourist train, why not use it for general public transport? Then you would get you would obviously get more demand and a better uptake of the service. So yes, that's pretty much my response. But I wanted to add quickly also to just the previous comment on safety on public transport for vulnerable road users. I had mentioned tying in these privately owned public transport operators into the transport system. If we were to do this, then of course, identifying, giving them some sort of identification, which would, one, assure users that they are part of the system, that they are operators that you can trust. And two, it allows people, what if I wanted to take a photo and send it to a friend to say, I'm on this particular taxi, I'm traveling at 10 p.m. I just wanted to let you know that I'm with Trevor Townsend in the event that, you know, then this is something to be done.
Yes, so that is a use of the technology that has been organized by some entity. Yeah, that is correct. Councillor Selina, Curtis, I see you had a couple of questions that you answered in the chat. I don't know if everybody picked it up. Perhaps the general question, which is useful just to hear from you, about which ministry is responsible for building the infrastructure required for the BEV hybrid vehicles, and how is this rollout being integrated into a national transportation plan? Curtis, you want to jump onto that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks for giving me the controversial ones, right?
I'll help you out.
Yeah, so as it is right now, there's not a comprehensive plan to deal with that. So the natural gas plan, which is what we handled, that was defined and it was made operational. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, if you're going to get into battery electric vehicles and hybrids, now they have hybrids and they have plug-in hybrids. So you're talking about infrastructure. Now, that will require several agencies to actually coordinate on it. That's going to be, I know it will be Ministry of Energy to some extent. It's going to be Ministry of Public Utilities, because there's a matter of power electrics. There's also going to be the Transportation Ministry to some extent, as well as the Ministry of Planning. Now, these four agencies, I'm aware, once you're talking transportation, you need to have the Ministry of Transport. Once you're talking powering devices, powering equipment, and electrical transmission and distribution and charging infrastructure, you need to have the Ministry of Public Utilities. All the power in Trinidad and Tobago comes from award of the Ministry of Energy, which is NGC providing gas for power generation. So it's not a simple question to answer, and perhaps that's something that really needs to have a very, very close examination to determine which one of those agencies will have to deal with it, because Trinidad is different. We now go into renewables as well, Trevor, so that does have some bearing. If we leave it up to certain entities, I mean, the NGC group would like to see renewables only being the power of choice for electrics. Why are you using fossil fuel to put a battery electric car on the road? You know, it's kind of, it goes counter to everything as well, right? And then you're loading up the electrical infrastructure system in Trinidad and Tobago. So you will have to do upgrades in streets and towns. You'll have to start putting transformers if you have a few cars on the road. If it is right now that we have problems sometimes with power dips and so on in certain areas, adding 1 or 2 electric cars is not a little bit of power. All right. So I don't know if that help answers that.
But that shows us the kind of work that we have to do, Curtis.
Yeah. Yes.
So yes, you did highlight how complex the situation is and how it needs to be kind of owned. And
it has to be owned. Yeah.
It has to be rolled into a national transportation plan that has part of its elements a move towards cleaner fuels.
Yes.
In a way, what we seem to have is a move towards cleaner fuels in the absence of a national transportation plan.
Because
so that
we have to, yes.
Kind of doing it backwards. And that actually brings us to a question that was asked by someone is, why doesn't Trinidad and Tobago government have a transportation policy, a national transportation policy? And I know who asked that question, and I'm going to not anybody on the spot. I'm going to answer it myself.
Thank you very much.
The reason why we don't have a policy is that because we as a society have not pressed our government to have and implement a policy. One of the purposes of having this symposium is to create in a groundswell of action agendas, a groundswell of activity, a groundswell of opinion that points us in that direction. Because we have attempted to have national transportation policies at several times over the last 30, 40 years. And each time they have been derailed. Each time the attempts have been derailed. So that is just something that, in a way, by trying to pull us together and for us to discuss some of the key areas of concern and for us to try to come up with an action agenda, and that's what workshop days 2 and 3 are. We are hoping to move the national conversation in the direction of a national transportation policy that focuses on these areas. And in a way, you are part and parcel of that creation. Let me go to Professor Maria. Maria, you mentioned that people become more smart and change, government will start to support them. So is ICT a bottom-up kind of development?
Yes, I think if you look at the development of many of these technologies, they were actually driven by what is called cyber libertarianism. That is, people thinking that once the technology allows you to do it, then you can just do it. And so the creation of the earlier applications, if you think of Waze, Uber to a certain extent, were not driven by people absolutely, in transportation. They were just people who wanted to create a solution. And many of them, if you think of Waze, were citizen powered. They were not even data driven, they were citizen powered. Of course, the whole legal case against Waze and Google, who eventually bought the company, made history in that respect. But it was people who were, giving their information to help other people get across what was congestion or problems or police or enforcement or whatever on their own network. So I think there is a trend in this. They're very much driven by companies. Now, of course, someone earlier mentioned the fact that many of them are not transport companies. Indeed, they're just technology companies. But eventually, they get integrated in the system. They get accepted. In some countries in the global south, for example, they get accepted even more than public transport services, because they offer better service, they are more efficient, and so there is an opportunity there. Of course, governments will have to catch up. I still think that there is a role for government in all this, but governments are generally slow. And so if we wait for governments to do something, chances are that they will never happen. And so, yes, I think they definitely come as bottom up, and they should be. And it seems to me, at least from the last 10 years, if not 20 years, that is how they will continue growing.
So Maria, follow-up question to that is, how do countries like ours, these small island states, in our case, small and developing states, where should we be putting our ITS emphasis?
It's a good question. I think there is, of course, the infrastructural element. So the ITS on systems that allow you to understand how the system works. So understanding the mobility patterns, monitoring traffic, and really getting a hold of what the situation is. But then it depends, if you take public administration and institutions, they have a specific role in ITS, which are attached to sort of the public infrastructure. And that is not something which is private, so government certainly has some role there. Of course, if the goal is to monitor congestion or control congestion, there is now, off-the-shelf packages which you can buy to control that. Parking, for example, we don't charge for parking in Malta as well. So it's free for all, and it's a mess for all, of course. And so parking management, I think it's a primary tool to try and, manage traffic and reduce congestion. And the pilot we are trying is a very small pilot in an attempt to show government that, deployment of these technologies have benefits because they provide information. People know where to look for parking. They're not frustrated because they're not going to find, and provide everyone with enough information to manage the space. So from a government point of view, certainly the ICTs related to transportation can be used for management. And then, of course, in business, we've seen in the past 5 years the rise of shared mobility companies, scooters, all sorts of new mobility apps. And our own public transport company is now investing in these shared services with a lot of money going into these services. So sometimes all it takes is a bit of enterprise, but certainly a positive drive towards a solution. I think you kind of reach a sort of tipping point, and we're close to the tipping point, but I don't think we're on the tipping point enough for governments to act on what really needs to be acted upon. But we're close.
Thanks a lot, Maria. Mark has had to leave, as I said, but he said that he's going to be back tomorrow, and I'm sure he's going to be heavily involved in the revitalization towns group. Question for Cheryl. Not a very difficult one, I don't think. Do you think that public transport between islands should become a public good that the users don't pay for? Comparable like how fishermen get fish out of the oceans without paying for the fish, but they can sell it for their own benefit and to get revenues. But it feeds the country. Can you see transportation between our islands as being that kind of public good?
My personal view, and knowing Barbadians as well as I do, anything free is not considered worthwhile. I think, but everything comes at a cost. Even the fisherman has, for instance, to get his boat and his nets and whatever else to be able to get the fish, bring it back in, and keep it in good condition until it's sold. So nothing is free. So I think it should be, I don't think it should be a free service, but I certainly don't think that we should be charging the kind of fares and the prices of fares, for instance, that we do with our airfares. There's no reason why our airfares should be so high compared to, it's cheaper for most of us to go longer distances than the distances within the Caribbean. So I'm looking for something that is a reasonable price. And once it's a reasonable price, you're going to get far more people that are willing to use it and travel more often on it. So what's that? Like the economies of scale, shall we say, is what's related to that. So no, I do not think it is a good, but I don't think it should be a free good.
Yeah. Sharon, is not problem with the airfare the problem in terms of the average cost pricing, in terms of how the capital cost is going to be annualized in terms of the revenues, and as you said, the returns to scale. And I think the technology we use is also going to be important in terms of bringing those costs down. We do have some pretty good inter-island ferries, and that may be the right technology to use to really create a vibrant inter-island passenger
exactly.
facility. You know, we do
there are so many different ferries and sizes, and somebody's making money.
Well, and somebody's making money from I know in the case of island ferries in many, at least in Trinidad, it's highly subsidized. That's the Trinidad and Tobago one. But I'm thinking in terms of even the schooner transport of goods.
Yes.
Schooner transport of goods between the islands is not subsidized as far as I can see. And it is still bringing in goods at a reasonable price into the country. We get produced from many islands, and it comes in at a reasonable price. So
exactly.
Yeah. You know. All right. A question for Lacey. In terms of, are the majority of road fatalities only linked to exceeding the speed limit, or are there other equally rated factors that contribute to fatalities like road quality and vehicle quality and roadside obstructions and pedestrian behavior? I'm adding that one in.
Well, no. So it's not exclusive to exceeding speed limits. So we have, for example, breach of traffic signs. What readily comes to mind is red light running. So, for example, in a 10-year period, sorry, a 5-year period, just on the East-West corridor alone, on the East-West corridor alone at signalized intersections, I recorded well over 100 fatalities associated with red light running alone. Again, this is a 5-year period, so remember the statistics I would have quoted from the for the decade 2011 to 2020, where we were down to 100 fatalities in the last year. So, interpret that as you will. Pedestrians, yes, we have the issue, particularly with pedestrians crossing major highways. So that's that's an issue. We have seen that. I think as recently as last month or so, a pedestrian was killed crossing the, I think it was the Butler Highway. So exceeding the speed limit alone, by no stretch of the imagination, is the single most common cause of road fatalities. There are a number of different reasons, and they occur all over the place for a number of different reasons.
Thanks a lot, Lacey. And we're going to have to shut off very soon because it's way past our bedtime. I just have one more question, which I will ask of you, Curtis. Can you speak to what is the vision with respect to the role of hydrogen in the transition, talking about the transition into fuels, and what would a hydrogen economy look like in Trinidad?
Oh, you giving me like 1 minute to answer that?
Be precise.
Thanks for knowing that. Okay. Definitely, there's a role for it, right? And we're not just doing it because the rest of the world is doing it. It's been captured that it's a new opportunity. Now, I want to have this related to transportation. In the Trinidad and Tobago context, hydrogen and transportation is definitely going to be limited, at least within the certainly the short and easily into the medium term. Because hydrogen as itself, the technology is still evolving very, very quickly. So we believe that you'll see hydrogen into process plant use, whether that hydrogen is going to be gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green or turquoise, or whatever color whatever you fancy at that time. The world is coming to grips with how to define the different types of hydrogen, and then how to define how am I going to use that hydrogen and trade with it. Because as it is right now, producing hydrogen in a particular way adds cost to what the traditional sense is right now. So in Trinidad, we take natural gas, we make it into hydrogen in the process plant. So we have hydrogen, there's already hydrogen economy here. But in the context of the rest of the world, what we will see developing is more than likely either an import, export of hydrogen molecules, whether it's going to be compressed or whether it's going to be liquefied, and then using it. We expect to see it being first used in the traditional places. The demand for hydrogen is in methanol and ammonia production in Trinidad and Tobago. So that's an obvious choice. When you start to go to vehicles and so on, Trevor, it's going to require a very different kind of price point that may not be there yet. Somebody's going to have to insist you have to use hydrogen for this kind of application. Maybe hydrogen in buses, maybe hydrogen in certain marine applications. But that right now, it's evolving very quickly, it's evolving very rapidly. And where we see ourselves is not yet on the transportation side, right? But that will come. We see it more on maybe the process and the process usage, because that is where we are seeing now people making conscious choices. I want to have green ammonia, or I want to have green methanol. Sorry, I mean, I didn't give them much time to answer this, but maybe we could develop it some more, maybe tomorrow or on Wednesday. Fair enough?
Thanks a lot, Curtis. That's great. That's great. Thanks a lot. And in fact, I'm going to bring today to close by, first of all, thanking all our presenters. I really believe and when we envisage this process, we look for the presenters who could put our issues on the table, and I think that they have all done tremendously well in articulating those issues and prepping us for tomorrow. We roll up our sleeves and start to talk about what are the key issues that have come out of these presentations in each sub-theme area. We'll be working on what are those issues, we'll be having those discussions, what are the challenges and opportunities, what are the strategies that we should be pushing forward, and who are the stakeholders involved, because we're not going to solve problems in one go, but we could start the process of developing an action agenda for research, for creation of organizations, for movement forward in terms of policies in these areas. That's the intention. So the question my colleague asked in terms of why do we not yet have a transportation plan? Hopefully by the time we finish this process, there will be a national understanding of even a regional understanding, because the points that Sharon made are relevant to all of us. That we must not only have a policy and a plan, but also have a strategy for implementing it that goes beyond the 5-year terms of government. I think that is one of the issues that someone raised.